stretching out 70 billion light years. You know, that's a different vision. And belief doesn't call us to believe that it's really only 4,000 years old and that the fossils are put here by the devil to fool us. That would be the wrong way to understand it. What faith is about is how to think about the Big Bang in a way that makes sense and gives meaning to our lives. So we add the symbols from the past in order to make sense of the deeper reality that we now experience. Faith, when you say I believe, it really means I want these ideas and metaphors to influence my life. Well, this is a different way of understanding believing. It's seeing that the myths you believe in are like spiritual practices, like singing or chanting or doing yoga. You know, believing in the resurrection of Jesus has nothing to do with whether Jesus actually rose from the dead. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows what happened historically? Believing in the resurrection is believing in having confidence that life goes on, that the individual rose may die, but the bush lives on. People die, planet Earth goes on. Resurrection is so much bigger than the specific facts that are tied up in the stories. Campbell originally wanted to call that book, when he came back, you know, from Germany, How to Read a Myth. It ended up with a better title, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. But that first title reveals what he understood to be the central idea of the book. You read myths differently from the way you read a textbook. Maybe it's how we read a novel, because modern novels are all themselves myths in a way, aren't they? They are an individual authors creating a story with a message to convey to the reader. That's what the traditional myths were. We now, you know, we get exposed to these mythical stories, hero journeys on TV. If you watch TV every hour, you know, there's a new detective story. Every one of those stories exactly follows the myth of the hero. The hero's journey is the basis of all plots. So every movie has got this in it, because this is how we live. And what you were supposed to do, Campbell says, is to realize that these things are about you. The way to read a myth is to understand that the central character isn't God or Moses or Jesus or the Blessed Virgin Mary. The central character is you. And the myth isn't about God or Jesus or the BVM. It's about you. You are the fabulous character of fable. The stories are about you and how you can live a rich, socially harmonious, participating, contributing life. The stories are clues to who you really are. You know, in mystical terms, this is oneness with God. This is what the mystics long for, what the spiritual life longs for, oneness with God. Well, it's impossible not to be one with God, because what God is that you inside that is asking the question, what is God? So to understand what these symbols mean, say to apply them to you, let me very quickly look at afterlife. You know, this is in a way, afterlife is the basis of all the religions. The stories about God or the gods in Hinduism are all focused around explaining to human beings how to deal with death, because that's the big question that we constantly deal with. Campbell would say, how can we have them all be true, so that heaven and hell, reincarnation, just dying, all of these things are true at the same time? That is, we rise to a high enough perspective that we can see these are all symbols about the experience of what is happening to you and what you really are. I want to propose that one of the things he says, and how I understand that, is that the myths are not about afterlife, but about the experience of life now. You know, we use this expression forever, to live forever. We say, I will love you forever. Frequently when we tell somebody we love them forever, we will love them forever, it's because we're really in love with them right at that moment. I was just yesterday morning hearing that magic moment, that wonderful little song, you know, I will love you forever until the end of time. Well, that isn't really what it's describing. What you're saying when you say, I love you forever, is that I am overwhelmed by the amount of love that I feel right now. Forever is a metaphor in time for what is, in fact, depth in consciousness. And that is so of afterlife. Rather than focusing on afterlife as living forever, it is to say that we can, here and now, in this experience, be so aware that we experience deeply our being alive and our being conscious. I want to get to Joe saying almost exactly what I just said, and here.
When people say to me, do you have optimism about the world, how terrible it is? I said, yes, just say it's great, just the way it is.
But doesn't that lead to a rather passive attitude in the face of evil, in the face of
You
wrong?
participate in it. Whatever you do is evil for somebody.
But explain that for the audience. I mean, you say yes to that which you...
Well, when I was in India, there was a man whose name was Sri Krishna Menon, and his mystical name was Atmananda, and he was in Trivandrum, and I went to Trivandrum. And I had the wonderful privilege of sitting face to face with him as I'm sitting here with you. And the first thing he said to me is, do you have a question? And because the teacher there always answers questions, he doesn't tell you anything, he answers. And I said, yes, I have a question. I said, since in Hindu thinking, all the universe is divine, is a manifestation of divinity itself, how could we say no to anything in the world? How could we say no to brutality, to stupidity, to vulgarity, to thoughtlessness? And he said, for you and me, you must say yes. Well, I learned from my friends who were students of his that that happened to have been the first question he asked his guru, and we had a wonderful talk for about an hour there on this theme of the affirmation of the world. And it confirmed me in a feeling I had had that who are we to judge? And it seems to me that this is one of the great teachings of Jesus.
Well, I see now what you mean in one respect. In some classic Christian doctrine, the world is to be despised. Life is to be redeemed in the hereafter. It is heaven where our rewards come. And if you affirm that which you deplore, as you say, you're affirming the world, which is our eternity of the moment.
That's what I would say. Eternity isn't some later time. Eternity isn't a long time. Eternity has nothing to do with time. Eternity is that dimension of here and now, which thinking in time cuts out.
This is it.
This is
my...
If you don't get it here, you won't get it anywhere. And the experience of eternity right here and now is the function of life. There's a wonderful formula that the Buddhists have for the bodhisattva. The bodhisattva, the one whose being, sattva, is illumination, bodhi, who realizes his identity with eternity and at the same time his participation in time. And the attitude is not to withdraw from the world when you realize how horrible it is, but to realize that this horror is simply the foreground of a wonder. And come back and participate in it. Life is sorrowful, is the first Buddhist saying, and it is. It wouldn't be life if there were not temporality involved, which is sorrow, loss, loss, loss.
That's a pessimistic note.
Well, I mean, you can say yes to it and say it's great this way. I mean, this is the way God intended it.
You don't really believe that?
But this is the way it is. And I don't believe anybody intended it, but this is the way it is. And Joyce's wonderful line, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. And the way to awake from it is not to be afraid and to recognize, as I did in my conversation with that Hindu guru or teacher that I told you of, that all of this as it is as it has to be, and it is a manifestation of the eternal presence in the world. The end of things always is painful. Pain is part of their being a world at all.
But if one accepted that isn't the ultimate conclusion to say, well, I won't try to reform any laws or fight any battles or
I didn't say that.
Isn't the logical, couldn't one draw that, though, the philosophy of nihilism?
Well, that's not the necessary thing to draw. You could say, I will participate in this row, and I will join the army, and I will go to war.
I'll do the best I can.
I will participate in the game. It's a wonderful, wonderful opera, except that it hurts. And that wonderful Irish saying, you know, is this a private fight or can anybody get into it? This is the way life is. And the hero is the one who can participate in it decently, in the way of nature, not in the way of personal rancor, revenge, or anything of the kind.
So I think when I talk about the new myth, and when Joe talked about what is the new myth, the new myth is understanding that the old myths are all part of consciousness giving clues to itself about what consciousness is. In the old days, when they had kings and rulers, you had the idea that somebody ran everything. We now live in a democracy. God was one of those rulers. In a democracy, God becomes one of us. God then is not that being outside us, but is the consciousness that is revealing itself to itself as stories about God and afterlife and how we come back and how life goes on. That's a very different way of understanding religion, and it's one that at the same time today I think is almost obvious to us now that we've all been exposed. So it's interesting to see that the new myth has just crept up on us, and I hope that you all think that what I just told you is obvious and you really didn't need to even hear me say it. Thank you. How's that?
We'll have questions and answers now. Would you raise your hands high if you have a question? Douglas?
Thank you for an excellent presentation. My personal background is physics, and I kind of drifted into engineering to have something to do for a living. In the sciences, there are often different types of models for the same physical phenomena, light sometimes particle light, light sometimes wave-like. You talked about religions as being, and myth as being, kind of a different way of understanding the world. Do you think these are kind of the same things, parallel?
Yes, I think that's a very good parallel. That's a very good parallel, that different models. Here, I'll share a Campbell story. This was one of Campbell's favorite stories. He said he was giving a lecture one night talking about the hero and how these different religions all share, and Hinduism has its hero and Christianity has its hero, and Jesus is the hero. And during the question and answer, a rather stern-looking lady stood up in back and said, Professor Campbell, I've been listening to you all night, and, well, I think you're an atheist. And Joe said he stepped to the front of the stage and said, Madam, anyone who believes in as many gods as I do can hardly be called an atheist. But of course, in traditional religion, there can only be one God. So it is really, it's different models, isn't it? Light is a particle and a wave. People live in heaven and hell, although that's what we do in our own lives. We send out vibrations that continue on into the future. We reincarnate the past. We get reincarnated in the future. Our lives make a difference. All of these things all mean something. And what they mean is what's true, not the model, in much the same way as science is trying to come up with models, and it always requires more than one model. Thank you for that. That's a good parallel.
We have a question from Marcus.
Thank you. I would be interested in what Campbell would say about this. It's a topic, and it has to do with I guess, Jungian psychology and other things. There's three of us here who are on the board of directors of the Jung Society, by the way. We went out of our way to come. Anyway, the term in the German-speaking world that goes back centuries is called, I believe, the Völkisch. You know, that is, if you're Austrian or if you're German or if you're Swiss, German-speaking, the term is Völkisch. It's like pan-Germanicism or like ethnic Germans. And I don't know if there's any other analogy to that, but if you kind of get my feeling, even Carl Jung was what I would call as an ethnic German, even though he was a Swiss national. Could you expand on that a little bit? I think you get the grasp of what I'm saying, the German spirit or the Germanic spirit.
Oh, that this way of thinking would be a Germanic way of thinking?
Somewhat. That's what Carl Jung talked about, because he identified with the German Völkisch, not as much as a Swiss national.
Yes. Well, certainly our nationalities give us a sense of spiritual connection. I think we think of ourselves as Americans. The American collective mind is a little different from the French or the German. And maybe even the best parallel is to Jewish, where there truly is an identity that goes with the genetics and even and exists even within other cultures and survives exposure to other cultures. America now, we're looking at a way of homogenizing it all, or allowing all of it to exist together. Interesting question of what pluralism is, and I think that's one of the issues in modern society is how we allow there to be an America in which we are all parts but different, so that Hispanic culture can stand different from New York Jewish culture, different from Southern culture. These all can coexist. There's a sort of a conservative notion that there's only one America, which tends to be white, isn't it? And that everybody is supposed to assimilate into that. I'm not sure exactly if that's the point you're raising, but I think when Campbell talks about, in understanding what roles the myths have, a lot of the myths are tied into nationality. You know, the Wagner and all those Germanic, Teutonic myths.